This is just like an overview about what we've been doing on the EDI project and just like what we've been finding so far. So, oh, that's the title. The EDI project first came around in 2022 through the launch of Innovate UK's report, Lived Experiences of Women and Girls in Relation to Everyday Journeys, led by Carla Jakeman, and since then it has become a huge project that is a collaboration between Innovate UK, TTF and LCRIG, with the project led by Paula, myself, Jo Davidson from Innovate UK, and with support from the DfT and Darren. The EDI project, at its simplest, is a collection of all the available information on EDI within the transport sector that will be made more readily accessible. It aims to both highlight the consequences of poor EDI regulations and promote and assist companies in aligning their goals to incorporate EDI. With this in mind, the EDI project is primarily aiming to make the transport service more accessible and the transport industry more accessible. It aims to close the transport gap that some people disproportionately feel. The EDI project is also currently underway to becoming a report itself, which will be a collation of all the information we've found as well as what we didn't find, and this will be incorporated into the manual for smart streets. Oh heck. That wasn't supposed to come up later. Oh no, it was. Never mind. So EDI stands for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion, and ultimately ensures that everyone receives the same opportunities and treatment, eliminating both conscious and unconscious prejudice and discrimination. And intersectionality describes the interconnected natures of the categories. It links to EDI as it asserts that people who are categorised into one of the equality groups often end up fitting into another. So, for example, if you are older or like the elderly, the possibility of you also having a disability is increased. Sorry. In transport, while it is unconscious, we have found some areas where there are poor EDI regulations, and some of these are surrounding cases in which female employees are given inaccessible progression pathways in their job roles, cases in which people with disabilities feel excluded from transport provisions due to inaccessible infrastructure such as no step-free access, and cases of people with low access to technology paying more or being unable to travel due to inefficient transport payment services. Within the transport sector, current EDI regulations can be economically beneficial as it allows people to become more economically active within society, environmentally beneficial as it decreases dependencies on private car use, and socially through increased cohesion between communities. And some of the outputs you'll find a bit later on. A key point for the project was to try and assimilate a wealth of standalone projects and statistics into transport areas. There are some excellent reports out there that are really in-depth, and by creating some abstracts, it's allowed us to put them out there in like an easy and accessible way to find. We've categorised them into the subtopics of the manual for smart streets, and this proved to be really successful for some of the topics with overwhelming amounts of information. But for some, there was a lack of relevant and up-to-date information, and we just didn't have a lot of time to be searching for too long. Next was the creation of the reading list, and that will be incorporated also into the manual for smart streets, and the extraction of key statistics that we found that related to EDI. And now that this data is all together, we can review our previous assumptions that we made, that we had on the topic.
That's me, apparently. Yeah. Well, I'd like to start by saying thank you to Carla for that. And thank you to LCRIG for doing this piece of work, which is really, really important. And I think inclusion, diversity and equality is an incredibly important subject. And if you think back to what we were saying earlier, what I said about technology this morning, it's not about boxes with flashing lights, it's not about cables and holes in the ground, it's about how we deliver better services. And one of the things that we're delivering through the Transport Technology Forum is the Manual for Smart Streets, and that's about thinking how we use technology to deliver better services. Well, we're not delivering better services if those services aren't more inclusive. If those services that we deliver don't allow people with a diverse range of needs, a diverse range of demands of the transport sector, if they're not able to be included equally within the transport services that we build, then we've sort of failed, really. And I think I've got to give credit to Innovate UK, who, as many of you have heard me speak before, will know half fund the Transport Technology Forum, and it was their funding that allowed us to develop this piece of work. And this is very important because we knew that we would have to do something around EDI. Knew we would have to build this kind of thinking into the way that we develop transport services in the future and the way that we use technology. But actually, it quickly became clear that the problem isn't that we need to research EDI. The problem is there's too much research. There's too much to read. There are too many reports and too many different pieces of guidance and strategy and policy and research into this area, and it just becomes overwhelming. So it's fantastic the work that you've done, supported by Paula and paid for by Innovate UK, has actually taken that, as we've just heard, has taken that and distilled it into some really useful guidance, some really useful key pieces of information that we should all think about when we're developing technology solutions. And as we move forward, as we develop the Manual for Smart Streets, we will be able to include that, and we'll be able to include clear, concise guidance that tells you the sort of things you should be thinking about as you procure technology. Not just to procure technology that's efficient and reliable and has a low running cost and all the other things you need to do, but also to procure technology in a way that promotes inclusion, diversity and equality. And I think that's really important. I think that's a core theme of the way that we deliver the Manual for Smart Streets. And while we're thinking about services around parking and charging and traffic control and all the other services we think about, one of the things that cuts across that is do we provide services in an equal, diverse and inclusive way. So I'd really like to commend this piece of work. It's really useful, and it will be definitely part of the way that the manual develops. Do you want to do the last slide, or do I have to?
2 more slides.
You've got 2 more. Well, off you go. You carry on.
So these are just some of the impacts of poor EDI standards in the grid. That affect vulnerable groups and wider society. And while they have been placed individually for looking at, they should be viewed together because they are also interconnecting. So if we take EDI regulations within public transport as an example, direct impacts include that there's a fact that a wheelchair user's commute in London takes 5 times longer than somebody who isn't in a wheelchair. And this means that not only is public transport less efficient and more expensive for these users, but it can also decrease their reliance and their safety on these services, either forcing them to use private cars or just not travel at all. This reduces their independence and creates notions of exclusion for the inaccessibility of public transport. In turn, this then feedbacks into society where indirect impacts include the increased use of private vehicles, which is causing traffic congestion that costs £177 million per year in London alone, which further increases the amount of air pollutants, which is causing 29,000 premature deaths every year. And that just shows how the impacts of poor EDI regulations cannot be viewed as singular, but are interconnecting web of impacts that disproportionately affect different user groups, depending on the scenario. And this type of feedback of decline can be adjusted to fit all the topics in the Manual for Smart Streets, highlighting how one area is not more important to consider than the others. While researching and reading lots and lots of reports on this project, I found there to be not really much information out there on how current innovations are making traffic data management and transport payment services, not just services, more inclusive and accessible. These reports seem to highlight current impacts that user groups are facing, which is leaving them to feel that public and active travel methods are not accessible to them, but not current or projected schemes that will then fix this. I also found that while the reports I analysed on EDI within signal control showed different initiatives that aim to change the problems they're currently having, they mainly focused around people with visual impairments and they didn't really consider like other user groups that would also benefit from them, diminishing the project's wider benefits. I also found that very few of the reports considered how to make, I also found very few reports that considered how to make intersection crossings safer, and I feel like more should be showcased from other areas around that. I also found that a majority of the reports we investigated had a strong focus on disability, with some reference to age and gender occasionally. And while that is amazing and really good, and the work has been varied, I think there should be more done with a stronger focus on increasing inclusivity between like ethnic minorities, people in rural communities, and lower incomes as a few of them. Leading on from this, I also think a massive topic which needs addressing is intersectionality. This topic, when mentioned at all, was usually only mentioned quite briefly. And in the reports I analysed, I feel it should be focused on a lot more because it's got such a big impact on inclusivity and accessibility. Because as you can see from that little diagram, all the equality groups like interlink completely. Like people from households of lower incomes are more likely to be from older ethnic minorities or disabled communities, which places them at a disproportionate disadvantage entirely. And the impacts should be addressed as such. Furthermore, I think many of the reports I analysed didn't consider the interconnectivity of the equality groups when discussing the benefits of their schemes that they'd done. So they were listing all the benefits, but not all of them, and it just diminishes the project's success. I'd also like to address this image that I found. I did steal it, but I think it highlights intersectionality really well, as it highlights the percentage in London of people that can be categorised into one or more of the equality groups. And that's it.
I'd just like to thank LCRIG for that fantastic piece of work and that fantastic presentation, and also for pointing out that as I am now elderly, I'm also likely to be suffering from all sorts of other diverse needs. That's a great thing to end on. Over to you.
I have to confess I'm feeling slightly emotional here. Carla has come such a long way. God, I'm getting really upset. Carla has come such a long way over the last year. And, oh my God, too much dayness. But I think this is why it's really important to get, young people involved in projects, because actually young people from different groups see things in a different way. When Carla brought some of the results from the research to me, it blew my mind just how much we're missing out so much in our sector. So Carla and I will be doing a lot more research next year. And I think, Carla, you've been absolutely amazing, and thank you for all your help. We've not quite finished the project yet, but it's been fantastic. And apologies, but I'd really like you to give a big hand to Carla again.